Sibil was induced at 35 weeks and successfully delivered her son, Andrew. 9 days later, he had his anticipated open heart surgery to repair his tetralogy of fallot with pulmonary atresia, and it went beautifully. As Andrew was recovering in the NICU, a geneticist entered and shared with Sibil and her husband that their son had 22q. They then had a meeting with a team of doctors who could explain what that meant for their son. Feeling overwhelmed, Sibil returned to her baby's side in the NICU. She picked Andrew up, and he looked straight in her eyes. It was in that moment, gazing into her baby boy's eyes, that she felt so much comfort. That is when she knew he was going to be all right. This was the beginning of Sibil and Andrew's 22q journey. Podcast. My name is Becky White, and today we have Sibil with us. Hi, Sibil. How are you?
Good. How are you, Becky?
Good. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I met Sibil she heard about the 22q podcast, and she said, I would love to share about my son. So, Sibil, could you introduce yourself, introduce your family, and a little bit about you?
Sure. My name is Sibil Matthew. My family and I live right outside of Philadelphia. I have a 12-year-old son. He's almost 13, named Andrew, who has the 22q11 deletion syndrome. Currently a stay-at-home mom. And Andrew has a younger sister who is 6 years old. My husband, Saji, works in New York City currently in media finance. So he is away a lot, going from Philadelphia to New York. And, he has a job that has required travel and whatsoever. So I am kind of the house manager, executive producer of this show for a lot of the time, but he is wonderful too. So yeah. I don't want to make it sound like he doesn't do anything, but he does a lot.
Yeah, you're the organizer, you're the chef, you're the transportation, you're the nurse, you're everything. Yeah. So you're pretty much there. And when do you get to see him often?
Yeah. So he currently, I think everyone past COVID was one of those situations that really kind of turned everything upside down, because I had somebody who was leaving home very early in the morning and coming back in the evening. And then during his spare time, when you've got a 22q kiddo, sometimes scheduling a lot of medical appointments and really helps out a lot with that. We're about like 45 minutes away from CHOP, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. So we do all of our appointments there, and he's kind of the person who goes and handles a lot of that for me and does the scheduling, does all those different kinds of things. But we were one of those families that COVID happened and everything shut down, and he was home all of a sudden all the time. And it was such a unusual thing for a family. We loved it. He's just started to kind of go back and do that hybrid office schedule. Because everyone hears stay-at-home mom and they think they know, right? But unless you're really in those shoes every single day, and it's all hard. I always say this about mothers, just, working mom, stay-at-home. It's just a mom 24/7. It's a lot. It's a juggling act. It's a professional juggling act. But I think he really got to see it up close, how many different hats you're wearing all the time. And really how important it is to make space for yourself, kind of to breathe, because you don't always get to schedule that in all the time.
But it's so important. What do you do to breathe and take your time for yourself?
Well, first I remind myself to do it, which is huge, because I think it's so easy to just keep going. And you think sometimes self-care is booking yourself a spa day or going and, going out to dinner or something like that. And that's all good and well, but it is really important to just literally unplug sometimes and allow yourself to feel things and process things. And I think I used to be really terrible about that, but I've gotten a lot better just on that, giving myself a chance to reflect, or having a situation happen and not immediately having an answer for it.
Yeah.
You're not having to be a know-it-all, you put that pressure on yourself a lot, but inside you're screaming like, I don't know. I just don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
tough.
sometimes sitting in that uncomfortable moment of not knowing what to do, not having all the answers. Sometimes you get your best answers by just not reacting.
Yes.
Definitely. Tell me a little bit about Andrew. Tell me from the beginning, what was it like?
So I found out that something was possibly wrong when I was about 20 weeks pregnant, and you have that anatomical scan. And that's really when there was a flicker of, oh, wait, there might be something here, where I remember not passing the first one. And they told me something like, well, it could be the baby's positioning and you have to come back. And I came back twice. And I think it was around 22 weeks pregnant where they said, we're just not getting all the pictures that we need, or an accurate picture. And now we're thinking it's because there's something there. And when I asked, what is it? They said it's heart. And so we're going to refer you to a cardiologist.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time I had gestational diabetes. It was pretty controlled, but I was about 29 years old when I was pregnant with Andrew, and I was relatively healthy. You're left kind of with more questions than you have answers. And I remember going to the cardiologist and getting an echocardiogram. The doctor sitting me and my husband down and telling us, your baby has tetralogy of fallot. Completely like, for what? Huh? And she was drawing it on a piece of paper. And my background is journalism and English and stuff. I don't have a medical background at all. And I remember telling the doctor, pretend I'm a child and explain it to me, because I just remember hearing her talk, not being able to process it. She's drawing things. It was a lot.
Yes, they did the same thing to us.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling the same exact way. I was like, please dumb this down.
Yeah. Yes.
You just told me my baby has a hole in its heart. What are you talking about? Yeah, continue. Sorry.
Like, oh, there's a hole in the heart, but there's other things, and it's this and it's that. And you're asking the really important questions, what does that mean? And when you have this super intelligent person who's an expert in their field, drawing diagrams and telling you everything, suddenly saying to you, I don't know. That's the scariest feeling in the world, because if they don't know, well, what do I know? And so I remember leaving that appointment, and I was devastated. I think I went home, and I think I spent the next 2-3 days in bed just hysterically crying, because I just really did not know enough. And did the worst thing possible, which is you Google things and you get the worst case scenarios. And I just really did not have a grasp on this. And it wasn't until the next appointment when I went in, and it was a lot more hopeful. It was like, we're going to get more pictures. We're going to get more scans. And then I was referred to Children's Hospital Philadelphia, where they have a fetal maternal medicine program. And I switched my maternal care over. And they had said, if you have a child with a birth defect, you can deliver here at our special delivery unit, which was brand new at the time, I remember. And kind of state of the art, had its own personal NICU for the baby. And all I kept hearing from everybody is, if this has to happen, you were in the best hands. You were in one of the best hospitals for children in the country. So I felt hopeful. And then as we got more tests and more scans, it was told, okay, it's tetralogy of fallot. I remember this term. It's kind of the bread and butter of pediatric cardiology. But I was incredibly stressed out. I remember that. And I remember going for my weekly gestational diabetes tests. 35 weeks, I was not having the greatest of scans. And the doctor at the time felt confident that the baby was ready. The baby looked good, said, let's induce you. The only thing I was really terrified at that point was, I remember prior to that, all I kept hearing was, need a nice full-term baby. And so then that was terrifying. I'm going to have a preemie, and I don't know what else might be wrong with this baby, was kind of my mind frame at that point. Mm-hmm. But CHOP was great. Yeah. They were wonderful. That special delivery unit was such a blessing. And, he was delivered and he was immediately taken to the CICU, which was an incredibly weird feeling to have your first child be able to hold that child for literally 30 seconds. And he looked great. The way that I read, came out this like calm, super zen baby, wasn't really looking around, curious. And I would say that's still his personality today.
Yeah.
Like the baby that I delivered grew up and, is that big kid today that I have also. But he was whisked right away into the CICU. He had heart surgery at 9 days old. And at that time, the diagnosis that we had was tetralogy of Fallot with pulmonary atresia. They told me the tetralogy of Fallot is not the concern, it's a pulmonary atresia. And they couldn't really tell me what they would do for that. Something that he'd possibly have to have a few more surgeries as a child, or it could be something that they can go in and kind of, patch it up and he could get a valve replacement later on in life. It was given those scenarios. We had a wonderful doctor, Dr. Spray, who was his, cardiothoracic surgeon. Best case scenario situation, he came out, they said it's a total repair. We were able to poke a hole into the pulmonary valve, and he won't need that surgery until, he's a teenager. He shouldn't have to be on medication. It shouldn't affect his quality of life. He's going to be okay. And that was like the first real sigh of relief. I think since I heard it was that.
Wow.
And, then the issues were feeding and, growth, preemie growth. So we got, moved over after a week to the NICU, and we were just dealing with preemie feeding issues. And it was during that time that I had a geneticist come in, and she said, while we were doing this heart surgery, we took a piece of genetic material. I'm sure I was told, but I was told it was a positive for the 22q, deletion syndrome. And again, it was like someone was speaking Latin to me. And I remember immediately I was in the NICU, I was holding him. I had just fed him, and it was like, we're going to go into a conference room. It was the geneticist, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a social worker, and me and my husband. And it was suddenly they're telling us about 22q. And I'm like, okay, again, we're going back to everyone's giving me a lot of information. I don't understand it. And all I want to know is, what's the prognosis? Is my baby going to live, or is he going to die? That's literally the two extremes I was always in. I remember asking the geneticist, and I don't think she meant to be cruel in any way whatsoever. I think she was trying to figure out what I was asking. I said, what is the prognosis? And she said to me, well, he's not going to be a doctor or a lawyer. And that felt like a slap in my, I was like, no offense, but I'm not a doctor or a lawyer. And it was a traumatic experience. I do remember that. I remember going back, and I remember the social worker telling me that was really insulting, like even for me sitting there.
Okay, good. I'm glad that someone in the room reassured you how inappropriate that is to say.
Inappropriate. And it was not the thing. Now, so many years, I'm trying to justify it and give her some kind of grace, but it kind of highlights that sometimes in pediatric care, people just do not have a bedside manner with new parents that are already in trauma.
She could have said anything else. She could have said, we don't know what his prognosis is, but we're going to do everything we can.
Yeah, it really threw me for like a curveball. But I remember coming back, and I was very upset once again, and coming back and going, okay, I have to go pump in an hour and a half. I have to get hydrated. I have to, do this, and this. I remember picking him up, and I remember looking at him, and it was just one of those moments that stays with me it will stay with me for my entire life. He looked at me, and the way he looked dead in my eyes, it was like an old soul was looking at me. It was such a comforting moment for me, because in that moment I should have, I was supposed to be taking care of I was supposed to be the one, comforting. He comforted me in such a way. He looked me just straight in the eye and kept that eye contact. And I just felt in my heart, he'll be fine. We'll be okay. We'll be okay. And that was that moment that I really kind of carried with me, and probably allowed me to have grace for everybody else who said the wrong thing in that moment. And he spent 5 weeks in the NICU total.
Wow.
And it was feeding and weight gain. And, it was the post-recovery from heart surgery, feeding tube at one point. And I remember them telling me, if you want him discharged at 5 weeks, you have to learn how to insert a feeding tube. And my husband and I practice, and we had to learn how to do it just in case you're taking this small child home and, they need to gain weight. It was the best case scenario. And we walked out of there and I didn't have to worry or think about his heart. I was more worried about feeding and the usual newborn parent things. And
Right.
so, and growth. I remember going in and I remember the doctor always telling me, we did everything at CHOP. We had our pediatrician at CHOP. I remember her telling me, don't look at the growth charts. Don't, just look at his own curve, follow his own curve. And he was on the bottom for height and weight. And it was hard. I was always thinking of ways to plump him up, and a lot of shakes, a lot of blending, a lot of, all those high calorie, food boosters that could help him. That's what we did. NICU, I remember. And I remember with pumping, because I was exclusively pumping since he was a preemie and he couldn't breastfeed. He didn't have the stamina to do it. I remember that rat race was around the clock, every 2-3 hours, even in the middle of the night, I was getting up. And what it does to a newborn mom, I remember those first couple of weeks pumping around the clock, but spending all day in the NICU. And it was just that, rinse, repeat cycle over and over again of insanity. And I remember finally around 5 or 6 months, because we were supplementing with NICU. I remember a pediatrician, she was a woman, and she just held my hand and she said, you can stop if you want to. You can stop. If you are, it's impeding on your quality of life, you're getting up and you're hardly getting any milk and he needs more than what you can stop at any time. I want you to know that. You don't have to. You can do whatever you want, but I'm giving you that permission. And I needed to hear that. Because I remember the first couple of weeks, nobody means harm is what I really think. I had a wonderful experience, but there'd be people, oh, that's all the milk that you're getting? Or, oh, that's how, he's a preemie. He really needs that milk. Breast is best, this. And it was like that messaging where I remember immediately feeling like I'm a failure. And I felt sorry for my child that I was his mother and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know. This was my first baby. I wasn't around a lot of babies. I had no idea how to do anything, I felt. So I remember just feeling like such a failure and just kind of really hopeless. And when she said that, it was like another, I don't think I ever, when I look back on it, I don't think I ever really relaxed. Yeah. And that was
Same thing for me. I pumped for 3 months, was in a very dark place every single time I pumped. I felt the same thing. I felt like I was a failure. I did not produce a lot at all. I would pump for about an hour and get about like 2 ounces. And I'm trying to survive and I'm trying to be the best mother I can.
Yes.
And all I want is to get this good nutrition into my kid. Yes. And I'm so glad that doctor held your hand and told you that, because
more importantly than being a doctor and being a woman, she was a mother who went through something similar. She had 2 kids that were in the NICU. And I remember her telling me, it's a rat race that you're always losing. And you know what the worst part is it's so natural. Oh, it's natural. Feeding your baby is the most natural thing in the world. And when you can't do it, you really do not feel like 100% a woman. You feel like there's a defect. You feel like there's something wrong with you. So sometimes saying the smallest thing can have the most impact. Just telling me like, it's okay. It's not you. And it's okay. Like the baby will still be fed. And not like 6 months, he had completely switched over to the NICU formula. And I remember him just taking off and thriving. And then there was that guilt of, oh, he couldn't thrive off of what I was giving him. And you feel like a failure. There's so many moments where it's you just beat yourself up. You're your worst judge. I want to say, like, other people can always say things and they say it with the best intention. It adds to it, but you are your own worst judge. Yeah. And I'm realizing later on, and it took me years to realize this, that this whole thing, there was an extended form of PTSD that I just wasn't even addressing or looking at or thinking, because going through a pregnancy and having a child is already hard enough. There's the whole postpartum issues and a lot of other things going on. But this was a case where there was how would you not have PTSD? And there was no one, they ask you those routine questions and it's like, are you suicidal? No, I wasn't any of those things. But if I had to go back and do it all over again, I definitely needed therapy. I definitely needed to address my mental health. It was such a traumatic situation. And I had a lot of PTSD. Around 8 months, he developed a cyst in his airways, but we didn't know it was a cyst. And we thought he was having bronchitis. We went to the ER. They were giving him like epinephrine, like around the clock. It was, getting dangerous. And then finally somebody thought, like after 2 days, to do a CT scan, and they see this huge cyst that was blocking about like 80% of his airways. And
Wow.
You have this child with GERD and everything, just so happy and mellow. I had to have surgery like right away, remove the cyst. And then you hear, well, once you have a cyst, you can always have a cyst. And this might be, reoccurring. It might be all kinds of things. Thank goodness he never did again. His functionality was great, but he did have a lowered T cell count. Functionality is good, but if he has a cold, he's going to take an extra day to kind of recover.
Right. But so with the first 5 years of life, he had cardiac, he had cysts.
Yeah.
What other major things other than the endocrine as well,
really
like you just shared?
GERD. GERD was really terrible. So we would follow up with GI all the time. I had a borderline low platelet count. So I would say all of his baseline, his tempo is always a little bit lower. And so that's kind of important to know. You're in a hospital with a child and he's got a fever, but it's like, no, wait, I have to tell you, his baseline's always a little bit lower. So something that's 101 to everybody else, but for him, it's a really pronounced big type of a thing. He had OT, and that was really, he had a little bit of weakness in both his hands. So I remember them finally saying he's ambidextrous. He would write with his right hand, and then he would do everything else with his left hand.
My son was the same way.
Yeah. So it must be like a 22 quirk. I don't know. I remember thinking, like, are we forcing him to? It's like, nope, we're going to follow his cues of what he wants to do. He's going to do it. He was seen by PT for many years. He had low muscle tone, especially core muscle strength, hypotonia, I believe they think it's called. Another really outstanding thing that he had was speech therapy needs. He had speech apraxia for the first couple of years, where he was a delayed talker. He really was, I think, about 3 years old before he was really saying his first clear word. He was a little bit hypernasal. He had a little bit of a submucous cleft issue. And then we found this later on because he had his tonsils taken out. And I don't know if this is 22 years, this is just a child thing. I know a lot of kids have ear infections and those kinds of things, but he had his tonsils taken out. They wanted to take out his adenoids also, but then they saw that the submucous, like it was weak over there, and they left it for his speech function finally. Yeah, I would say speech apraxia was a very big thing. But once he started to talk, I would say at the age of 5, I really saw they say like a switch kind of turn on, and kind of really took off. And I think in those first 5 years, what I really learned is let your child lead you, right? And give your child that power to have his autonomy. He doesn't need to do things in a prescribed way. Even I have to say, I had a lot of therapists over the years come over my house with, like between speech and OT and PT, and there's all different methods. There's people that are going to be like, we have to do it this way. And I remember thinking as well, I don't have any kind of medical background. I don't know what I'm doing, but I really started to find my confidence where I'm like, no, I'm his mother. Right. And I have to advocate for him, especially when it was nonverbal. I had to be like, that doesn't feel good. And so we're going to stop doing that.
I love that. Let your child lead you. And you are not the only parent that has ever said something like that. And with my son, he had to take, he had CMV, and they gave us this really, really, yucky medicine that whenever we gave it to him, he would get sick. He was lethargic, and it was impeding on his quality of life. And so after like a week of giving it to him, my husband and I really sat down. We were like, what are we doing? There's a chance this medication could work and help this one thing, but it's impacting the way he eats, where he needs to eat. He's a cardiac kid too. But I love that you learned that as a younger mom, that you gotta just, this is a different kid.
Yeah.
It is not a neurotypical kid, and letting him lead you. And, you know, if he takes him till 3 to get potty trained, takes him till 3, but I'm going to help him along the way. And I think that's wonderful that you learned that along the way.
I think it's also so important that as you're finding your voice for your child, you're finding your voice for you. And that's really your child empowering you rather than the other way around a lot of times. You know, my children are so honest, and they will be like, no, or it doesn't feel good. I don't want to do that. Or why can't I do this? And that questioning, I would start to answer with the basic like rule following, because I was always a rule follower. You know, I was always the kid that you told me to do something and I didn't ask why. And my son from a very early age would ask why, and he needed to know why. You needed to talk him through it. He's still like that. He just won't accept, you know, he just won't accept anything I tell him just as, okay, mom said, let's just do it. He wants to know why, which I think is fantastic, but in turn has made me ask why. Because a lot of times he would ask me why, and I would go, oh, I don't really know.
Right.
This doctor told us that we have to do it. Well,
Yeah.
why? You know, and then I would go back and I would ask, well, why?
Yeah.
The most outstanding things we saw after 5 was really learning differences. Andrew needed accommodations. He needed a smaller group setting sometimes to best learn. He needed prompts. Something as simple as his attention span can get away from him. And a teacher, you know, walking by, if she just like tapped his desk 2 times, he could focus. A lot of those kinds of issues came into play. And we were actually living in the city of Philadelphia. And I had sent him to a private school the first year and immediately thought, oh no, this was not decision. It was a great school if you did not have any kind of special needs. But I remember the kindergarten teacher being completely overwhelmed by him. And mind you, this is him coming out of a early intervention preschool where he soared. He did great. And they said he was kindergarten ready. He was ahead of what he needed to be. And I remember the director of that preschool being such an integral part of advocating for my child. I remember Miss Donna, we call her. She's an angel forever in our books. She's so important to our family because she would call that school. She would call the director and she would be like, you can do this, this, and this. And I know you can. And she would fight for him. And she would speak to him in a way. And she would call me up, see how he was progressing. Yeah. And that really inspired me a lot because she didn't have to do that.
Nope.
And she really saw how stressed out I was. When he was 5, I was pregnant with my next one. And again, a stressful pregnancy. She didn't have 22q or anything, but, you know, I had gestational diabetes again. I was just overwhelmed. And you have him in kindergarten. And I'm immediately thinking, I'm not in the right place for my child. I have to find a better school. But in the meantime, he has to be there for the rest of the remainder of the year. And it's not a situation where, you know, he's not being taken care of. They don't know how to accommodate him. It was little simple things like he would ask for a bathroom pass and then he would wander the hallways. And I heard he would be gone for, you know, somebody had to go looking for him. And I remember at that age, he was fascinated by cars. And he was thinking to go outside in the parking lot. Like there was a side door, just kind of open up the door and peek out. And that's what he was doing. Terrified me as a parent.
Oh my God.
Know, I heard this and it happened 2 times. And I was like, oh my goodness. I remember always being kind of ready by the phone. I remember the teacher, she was asking me for tips and things on how to, you know, teach him and help him. And it wasn't the curriculum. You know, I would sit at home with him and we would do the ABC. He had phonetic awareness. He was good with phonics. He could write, he could read, he could do all that stuff. It was just, he needed that smaller group setting. He needed that more personalized touch for things. And
Right.
socially, emotionally in the classroom, it was confusing for him. A lot
Yeah.
of things were confusing for
So
him.
when did he change to a different school?
I started looking into schools, and we happened to be nearby, and this is the current district that we're at, a school district that was terrific for special education. And he had speech therapy in the school district, but I also found a private speech therapist, and she was excellent. And we were doing private speech and the speech in school to just really kind of give him that push. And she was phenomenal. Her name is Bonnie Simon. If anyone's in like outside of the Philadelphia or Huntington Valley area, like look her up. She has made such a difference, and she's worked, kids that have like profound speech issues. And she's another one. She's a fighter. She's the one who told me about that school district. We moved with a 6-month-old and a 5-year-old, and it was like a world.
Oh my gosh.
Thing. But we did it. We really wanted to get into the district, and we were very blessed and lucky to be able to kind of get in. It was also a district. It was a small district. I remember people telling me the housing market is like houses sell in 2 weeks, 1 week. It's a very hot market. So it was this, race of like, I remember carrying my daughter and like my baby Bjorn and like going and seeing like 8 houses in a day to try to get in that district. But
good for you guys. And I'm so glad you were able to move. There's so many families that can't, but you did it and you figured it out for your son. And how is he doing now in school? How's school going?
He's doing amazing. He's in the 7th grade. Yeah, he has this IEP that's really tailored to him. There's a life skills program that he's a part of.
Good.
Elementary on, which is just amazing. And I would say those life skills teachers, they make all the difference because they really sit and speak to their students about social and emotional issues.
Right.
And that has helped Andrew so much. I was never vocal or very public about our diagnosis ever. Part of it for privacy, but to be really honest, partly also because I didn't want anyone to judge him. This was some of the advice that I was given when he was younger, because he did not present as a classic 22Q. He didn't have a lot of the features. A lot of that might be due to ethnic things. We are Indian, so I don't know if a lot of cases are recorded where what Indian kids look like with 22Q. And so he, honestly, when he would walk out in the world, people wouldn't think that there was anything wrong with him. But if you're a 22Q family, you can see the distinct features right away that like all of our kids have. He's able to blend in. And so a lot of times with accommodations and things, he would get questioned by his peers. Well, why do you get unlimited time for tests? Or why do you only get to answer 7 of those questions and not 10? Or like, why is there an aide nearby you? With peers telling you there's something wrong with you. You don't need those things. And him constantly kind of navigating this mainstream world and the world that he's in, he really had to make peace with that diagnosis. And as a mom, it was painful for me sometimes at certain kids saying certain things. It was a lot easier, I remember, at an elementary school level, or when things would happen, it would be really obvious. I remember in 3rd grade, he had this incident where he was really afraid of bugs, but it was bugs that made a noise, because the noise sensory wise to him was very magnified. If it was buzzing and I would ask him, what does it sound? It sounds so loud in my brain. And I remember there was a bug that came into the classroom and he freaked out. He really had a little bit of a meltdown. And it was a big event in that classroom because they had never seen him freak out before. I remember the teacher at the time took upon himself to kind of reach out to the life skills teacher and say, hey, can you come into my classroom? And can you give a lesson on, first of all, sensory issues, what it might seem like for him, kind of give these kids some education. And I remember him coming back and telling me that his peers came up and said, some of us just didn't know what to do. Some of us weren't doing anything. We didn't know what to do. And I thought this is such a great moment that you also, when you have these kids that have special needs or are different, it's important to also say, hey, I'm different, and that's okay. And make all the children feel comfortable and all the children feel empowered to ask questions and all that, because everyone needs that. My
Yes.
son
And
comes to me all the time and tell me, everyone needs a life skills class. Why do they only give it to some?
yes,
Everyone needs it. I'm like, you're right. I need a life skills class still.
right.
Right?
That is
Yeah.
so great that that teacher had the foresight and the know to, this is a teaching moment. Let's teach all the kids why he acted in that way. And, not every teacher would have done that. So, that makes my heart so happy to hear
Yeah.
that they did
And
that.
society, we always say, oh, reach out and do this and do that. But when you don't know what someone has, you're afraid of it. And it's easy to be ignorant. I can understand that. It's scary. And you sometimes don't want to be a part of it. It's too painful for you to even interact with that.
Right.
So I do think there can be a lot more done where you're bringing awareness, but that's kind of where I started to have this guilt last year when he was in middle school. And I remember asking him, are you okay with your 22q diagnosis? And he had to come to a place where he was okay and said, I have differences. This is who I am. But it really made me ask myself, are you okay with his 22q diagnosis? And yeah, it's a privacy thing. And I remember asking him, are you okay if mommy starts making a post, or we start telling our community, we start telling extended family? Because at that point, it was just close relatives and our closest friends that kind of knew. But even then I realized I wasn't giving a lot of information. People looked up what they looked up, like on Wikipedia, like that 1 minute that you tell
Right.
somebody, and they don't know anything else. And they see him and he looks, perfectly fine. And they don't understand why he's acting in a certain way.
Right.
And it was a disservice to him. And I realized, oh no, you're thinking you're not telling anyone he has anything, and he has this invisible disability sometimes. But then he's being forced to make accommodations for the world rather than the world making accommodations and making sure that he has everything that he needs to be able to navigate it successfully. And so that's really what made me go, no, I need to come out of my shell. First of all, I need to address whatever PTSD, whatever issues I've had with this. I need to do this for my kid. I need to do this for my family. And number two, I need to start being more vocal, because I can't just expect other people to understand this diagnosis. I'm still learning and understanding this diagnosis all the time. It was really in the past couple of years that I started following the 22q Family Foundation, the International 22q Foundation, started really considering attending things. We don't know in person another 22q family. And I would really like to change that. Andrew has never met in the flesh another child or person with 22q. And that's profound. That is like something that within this 365 days, next 365 days, I want to change that.
Good for you.
It was something that I realized, he wanted so much of that community and that feeling of I'm not going through something alone. And the experiences that I have, I realized how isolated he must have felt. And I realized how isolated I felt. And I remember the 22q Foundation saying, hey, share your story. And they had done a post, I think it was on Instagram and Facebook. I remember being really scared to share it. And there was a lot of silence. There was a lot of silence from my community and extended family. I didn't have anybody reach out and ask me anything. And
Why?
that really, I think, being Asian, being in the Indian community, there's this thing with, medical diagnosis or being different, having any kind of disability, that there's a lot of shame around that still. There's a huge stigma around it. And people don't talk about it. And when things are kept so silent and under the radar, brushed under the rug, people don't know how to react to it. And what I've realized, it's not that they're not supportive. They just do not have the toolkit to even have a reaction. So they're just processing it and taking it in. At first, I was really hurt.
I bet.
There was the usual people that, that already kind of knew that were really supportive. But it was slow. And I reposted it a few times. And then I slowly started people sending messages. I never knew. or I did know, but I didn't know what it was. I think it was like a few weeks ago with November being 22q Awareness Month. I posted a bunch of slides that were like informational material. And I have to say, I really felt dramatic doing it.
Really?
I did. I felt very dramatic. I thought I'm making such a big deal about it, and people don't care. People don't want this much information. I'm posting like an encyclopedia's worth of like 10 slides. I have to say, I felt like low-key ridiculous.
Yeah.
I had so many people that were silent before just say, thank you for sharing. I needed this information. Thank you so much for sharing this information. And I can't tell you how many people said that to me and then started to reach out to me and say, hey, I didn't know what to say.
Right.
And it's confusing because he's Andrew to us. He's this great kid. I didn't know he had all these things. And I get it. Like now when I'm making snap judgments of like why you didn't come to something when he was younger, and oh, big deal, your kid's sick. Like, I get it now. Probably the best thing that's happened is I've had Indian families reach out to me that I don't know across the nation. And write me like a direct message off of Facebook and say, hey, we just recently got diagnosed. We haven't told anybody. And thank you for sharing. I didn't even know there was another Indian family with this diagnosis. And that is so important to me. It's so, so important because I feel like, culturally, there is this silence and there's this lack of understanding. But I always remember people want to support you. They do. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people want to root for you, but you have to ask yourself, are you giving people the tools and the information to be able to do that? Mm-hmm. And so that's been our entire year. My husband and I, like we've said, we're really going to be a lot more vocal. My birthday, I had a 22q fundraiser for the 22q Family Foundation. We were able to raise $2,200.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you did. I'm so, so glad. And I also want to say thank you for stopping the silence. You said that so beautifully, and that takes so much courage. That must have been terrifying, posting and sharing and not knowing what was going to happen, but you did it. And now look, your entire network now knows more about Andrew and about this diagnosis. And that takes so much bravery, and you should feel so proud of yourself for doing that. And I did want to ask, for any family that is listening that is of Indian descent, what advice do you have for them if they're feeling this isolation, if they're feeling like they can't share? What one piece of advice would you want to give them?
Don't be ashamed. Don't think you did anything wrong. And I don't think this is for everyone. This is something that's really universal, because when you get that diagnosis, I think parents always think, what did I do? Did I do something for this? But the things I would tell an Indian family is share your story. It's really hard when no one else is talking about anything. There's a lack of awareness on so many issues. I know autistic families that don't want to speak up. I know so many other, my younger one was diagnosed as being on the spectrum. And again, got the advice, don't really share these comments from people. Oh, you would never even know. She's totally fine. No, she's fine. She's fine. And people want to make you feel better, but it reflects their discomfort. I would tell parents, share your story, share your entire story. Your child's identity is wrapped up with 22q. I always say a diagnosis doesn't define the person. You have to look beyond the diagnosis, but also sharing that diagnosis is important because it is a part of them. And this is something that our kids, it's lifelong. It's a part of their identity. And when you kind of don't give someone all that information, you're limiting your kid, you're limiting your family, and you're limiting the people that can come into your life and help you and support you. And so I would say there's no shame. You have to remove that stigma. You have to start speaking up about it, because it's not something shameful. It's something wonderful. He's a blessing. He's he's my greatest blessing in life.
Right.
And he has done so much for me in shaping me as a person. I've become more patient. I've wanted to help my community. And so I think with 22q, the number one thing I still hear from people is, I have no idea about that. A lot of people do not know about 22q. It's very rare to hear somebody go, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's usually because they know somebody else.
Exactly. Then it's wonderful that families are reaching out to you too and asking you, and you're giving them much better advice than you received in that meeting when you got the diagnosis. So
I think of that. I go, if I just saw a post like, and I really do want to shout out the 22q Family Foundation, because their posts are just so personalized and they really focus on the individuals. I just think if I saw these posts 13 years ago, what a difference that would have been. Would I have reached out to somebody and asked for a story? Because I didn't. I never reached out to anybody really. And how would things have been different? I say that our kids they're the compass in this. They're the ones leading us. We are learning more lessons from them than we ever teaching them. And, that's what I think ultimately, like, this year has felt for me, is just inspiring and hopeful. And there's like a whole world that kind of just opened up. It's freeing.
Sibyl, this has been amazing. And thank you for sharing your son with us. And before we close, I do want to ask you one last question. And that is, what has he taught you? I know you covered most of it, but in closing, what has Andrew taught you?
He's taught me to be brave. He's really taught me to be brave. And it's, it's so easy to say that. It's so easy to just say that. It's very hard to live that. I had to really ask a lot of the ways that I was living. It was cowardly. I was, saying one thing and living in a different way. And I always, in my heart of hearts, loved my child, loved, everything about him, would never change anything. But I was living in a way that I was ashamed. And I didn't realize that. And once that hit and clicked, it completely changed. He's the bravest person I know, just living his life and just being who he is. One final thing I want to share that was such a mom high for me was I went to back to school night this year, and they did a all about me sort of sheet or whatever, and it was in one of his homerooms pinned up, and it was your favorite color, your favorite subject, what's your goal in school, and it was said, who's your hero? And he wrote, my mom. And first of all, I was shocked because I thought it was dad, because he always wants to, the kids are all about dad. Dad's the fun one, right? Mom's the one always making them do stuff. They always want to spend all their free time with dad, especially because he's away from the home. He's working all day. So they want to maximize that time. I did not think it would be me. And I thought, first of all, for a nearly 13-year-old boy to write his mom,
that's amazing.
That's brave too. He wrote that. I take a picture of that whenever I have a bad day. I look at that. You can be a hero in people's lives. You can be a villain. You probably both to different people, right? But to have your kids say that to me, that's my cup was full.
Yeah, that's everything.
Yeah.
It's everything. Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Thank you so much. This was such a great experience. Thank you so much for having me on.
Sibyl, thank you so much for sharing your story and being brave enough to do so. You are stopping the silence and getting people talking and aware about 22q. And I hope to one day meet you and Andrew, and I'm so excited to hear more about when you eventually do meet another family with 22q. And for anyone that would like to contact me, you can reach me at 22qpodcast@gmail.com with any questions, concerns, or if you're interested on being on this podcast. Until next time, thank you again. Please share this and subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. And never forget, 22q family, that you are not alone.